Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's This Is Not Therapy Hour, brought to you by Effective Artistry. I'm Marie. I'm one of the executive functioning coaches with Effective Artistry, and I'm here with the big boss himself, therapist and executive functioning coach Brandon Tessers. Effective Artistry is a therapy and coaching practice based in Northbrook, Illinois. And if I have it right, Brandon, you're licensed for therapy practice anywhere in the state of Illinois. And then for coaching, you can work with anybody anywhere in the world as long as you have an internet connection and a Zoom link.
Yeah.
I think that's everything. Have I forgotten anything?
No, I think that's good. We mentioned that this is just an open conversation. Those of you who are here in the chat, we pick a topic and we have questions in advance, but we can talk about whatever. So people here in the chat will go wherever you guys want to go, but we'll start on whatever our topic is, which I don't remember. What is our topic?
Today's topic is about the holidays. So you've just had Thanksgiving in the US. So
Yeah.
belated for Thanksgiving.
Well, thank
Enjoy
you.
the break.
And should I wish you a happy Thanksgiving? I know it's not a holiday where you're from.
Why not? Yeah, it's nice to be thankful. It's nice to just have an excuse to say thanks and be grateful, show gratitude for those in your life.
Actually, go ahead. Tell us our topic before I take us off topic.
No, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, I talk with people all the time about cognitive miser, the brain only notices so much and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that happens there is negative gets noticed before positive. You notice bad and hurtful and painful things before you notice helpful and enjoyable things.
Yeah.
That's important. Which means that we all walk away from every experience disproportionately having noticed and then therefore disproportionately remembering the bad elements of things. In other words, the whole point of pain is that you notice it. You don't really get to choose not to, at least not at first, right? Whereas other stuff doesn't happen automatically. So it's important to set time aside. You have to actually make an effort to notice and remember good, enjoyable things. And I'm saying this not just because it's, good and nice and whatever, although it is, but because it's important from an effectiveness viewpoint, from a strategy viewpoint. You want to be able to know and remember what works for you, what suits you, what feels good. And if you don't formalize that or ritualize that in some way, you're never going to be able to just remember to say every day, oh yeah, let me think about what the good stuff is. So there's a reason that cultures all across the world will have celebrations or rituals set aside to just look at gratitude, things that you enjoy, things that you are thankful for, because it doesn't happen otherwise, and it is useful. There was a massive study done on happiness and what makes people happy and all these different factors and variables and whatever. And the thing that came out on top as being the one universal factor for people who are happy throughout the course of their lives is gratitude. Because it's not that, be grateful and then you'll get nice things. It's your entire universe is your conscious observation, experience, remembrance of your experiences, right? And if you're never taking time out to think about or notice the things that you enjoy, then your whole world is absent joy. So that setting that time aside is important. So it's nice to have those holidays. The Thanksgiving holiday in the United States is very, very problematic for reasons unrelated to gratitude, but related to the holiday.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you can't take that time and focus in. There's a reason that we meditate or pray or different practices where you want to say at the beginning of days or at the end of days, I'm grateful for this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like that's some of my most schmaltzy stuff to say to people, but it is important.
It is important, and I feel like you've answered some of the questions already.
Oh, good.
It's good to take time out and think about the things you're grateful for, even during stressful times, which the holidays can be. And that's today's topic. Stress and how to manage it, emotional and financial stress around big holidays when families or groups come together and inevitable tensions arise. So we do have a few questions to kind of drive the conversation, but as you said, if there's anybody wanting to join in the chat and ask extra questions or give us your thoughts, feel free to do so. I'm just going to pull up some of the questions we have. The first one was on financial stress. How can I better plan my expenses throughout the holidays so that I don't become overwhelmed? So I guess it's the season for giving, and it's the season for opening your wallet and emptying it out. I know I have a tendency to kind of, it's the time of year. It's an excuse to just buy all the presents for all the people, and I tend to be a little bit spendthrift at this time of year. Yeah, I'd love some answers to this question.
Well, so just because the question used the word overwhelm in it there at the end, I'm thinking of this as kind of two related things, but that are like separate. One is about like planning and budgeting finances, very like straightforward executive functioning kind of stuff. And certainly I'm not a financial expert, but we could talk about the executive functioning side of that.
Yeah.
And then the other is that feeling of overwhelm, because it is entirely possible that you plan and budget everything just right, but it still is very stressful and overwhelming when you go through it. So kind of two different things. I don't know. That's the way I see it. What would you say? Well, what should we talk about first? What's more interesting to you?
I guess the overwhelmed side of it, dealing with the emotional side of it. Before I go any further, can you hear my cat?
A little bit, but that's all right.
Will I just bring him in? That'd be easier.
Sure, fine, yeah.
Okay. I'll be right back.
I mean, we're talking about family and being together and the problems that.
Oh yeah, poor Billy. Thank you.
If there is anybody at this point who has been doing Zoom calls or working from home and is not used to cats appearing in those meetings, then I don't know what kind of life they're living. I don't have cats, but I have had many, many cats on Zoom meetings over the past few years. The overwhelm. Okay. So I'll say this, like finances are important. We all wish that they weren't, right? Like, well, maybe not all of us. But this is one of those things where it's, you got to deal with the system as it exists, problems and all, right? We can evaluate and analyze what things should be different than they are, or how it should be different than they are. And that is good and important to do so that we can work towards changing. But until that happens, as that happens, in the meantime, we do all need to pay our bills and manage our finances. And I'm saying that at the top because sometimes I think that's some of the overwhelm for people, especially when we're talking about the holidays and gift giving. And of course, we're coming at this from a very like America-centric approach. Obviously, we're talking about Thanksgiving, but also the winter holidays, Christmas, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's lots of gift giving and lots of big holidays at different times of the year. It's just timely right now for Christian and European and American.
Yep.
Not necessarily Christian. It's a very secular holiday here in the States, at least.
Sorry, Billy has to be on screen. If there's anything going on, he has to be in the middle of it.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Just reading the comments from Baston Cider. I hate the term grateful, but maybe the word appreciative fits a little bit better. Appreciate the concept. Grateful seems, I don't know, it's a demanding word. And yes, Kitty wants to be appreciated.
Fair enough. And language matters and connotation matters. And whether it's grateful or appreciative or whatever that is, like I said, it's kind of one of the more schmaltzy things I say, because I agree. I don't like framing it as gratitude. I'm more concerned about the effectiveness of it.
This is chaos. I'm sorry.
That's all right. What matters is that you notice good things, you acknowledge those good things, and you do something with that knowledge. Like the fact that you have noticed and acknowledged it, you have to do something with it in order to encode it into long-term memory. Otherwise, it gets forgotten. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, you will always be looking back and saying, "Why are things worse now than they used to be?" Or "Why has nothing ever been good?" If all you're noticing is the bad stuff. we're designed that way, right? Like in an environment in which there's so much bad, painful, uncomfortable, whatever, that we can barely navigate it, there's no room left over for the other stuff. And then when things are nice and comfortable and like I've been really anxious over the last, even though I've been with my family and enjoying, I was just telling Zoe, I have not had problems to worry about, but the brain doesn't stop worrying. That's not
No.
the whole point of thinking. Someone phrased it this way once: the brain's job is not to keep you happy, it's to keep you alive. And so it does that by noticing and adapting to, responding to anything that has the ability or the potential to decrease your ability to survive. And when that's not around, when there's nothing like that, it's going to go into anticipating things that might be problematic, could happen in the future, could be happening now in a way that we're not noticing. A very common, like, certainly one I experienced, but one that a lot of people I know, especially neurodivergent people, seems like that's that fear of I'm secretly dying somehow. I'm sure I have cancer in some way that's just, I have no symptoms of anything, but I'm sure it's happening, or I'm worried that it's happening. So that's why hobbies and interests and games and social interaction and stuff matters. Our brains need something to think about. Otherwise, we're just,
All we're going to think about is our mortality, right?
which is why it's easier to ritualize this stuff when you're looking at good things, because it's going to happen on its own. But yeah, grateful or appreciative. Both of those do kind of carry some connotation of like there's some entity to which you owe something in exchange for the good stuff happening in your life. I get that, but it's just, it's a like shorthand, emotionally evocative way of calling out. You have to notice good stuff and what works. Otherwise, someday taking us further off our question that's still unresolved right now. But one thing that I notice with ADHD people a lot is this: we'll do something that works well for us. We get excited about a new organizational system or whatever, and it's great for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then we fall off of it and forget about it. And somehow that gets logged away in our memories as, oh, we messed up again. Where something about that system, if nothing else, the novelty, but something about that system was beneficial for us for some period of time. And we want to be able to remember whatever element of that was helpful. We want to remember that to incorporate into new things in the future. Mm-hmm. But instead, if we think of it as like a moral issue of, oh, I failed to keep up on it, then it gets logged away in our memory as just another time I screwed up. And we end up thinking then, like when someone's like, I got to come up with a new organizational system. No, organizational systems don't work for me. Instead of, they work to some extent, or some elements of them work. And if we acknowledge that part, then we can pull it apart and rebuild new things. So even in bad and stressful or failed attempts, you want to notice the good elements to take away. Otherwise, you just grow and change very slowly because you're only just trying to avoid bad stuff.
Yeah.
Build on good stuff.
I guess where the bad stuff kind of gets pronounced, if we're talking about financial stress and stuff, is when you blow the budget. And you might have budgeted all carefully all year, and then it's the holidays. You want to, it's the season of giving, and then you blow the budget, and that can happen. You beat yourself up over,
See, I always like to think of it as like, I don't know if I should frame it this way out loud, but it's a useful way to frame it in my head sometimes as a bit of a battle, like an oppositional thing, where my intention, what I want to happen or what I think would be good to happen, is working at cross purposes sometimes, not all the times, but working against these external factors and variables that are pushing me towards some other outcome. So meaning in this case, there is so much going on, both things that we notice consciously and things that we don't notice consciously, to encourage everybody, at least in our cultures, to spend a lot of money right now, to buy a lot of gifts, right? And I think, to me, there's some value in being able to say like, oh, they got me. Sometimes, like sometimes you're going to fail. Sometimes you set a budget and you blow it. But rather than internalizing this as like, I'm terrible and I failed, it's like, oh yeah, we all get sometimes. Sometimes all that stuff that's being put out there, it gets to us and we slip and we miss it, we don't need to feel terrible about it. We just, sometimes you'll win, sometimes you lose.
There's a reason advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It works.
Right. Yeah, and culture beyond even just like the advertisements, the culture of it, the way that, you know, that if I get you something that you don't even want necessarily, that's still good. And if I don't, that's somehow bad. It means I don't care about you. Or if I give you $20 instead of guessing at a $20 item that I think you might like, that somehow that means I don't care about you. And of course, everybody thinks this, but it's enculturated. We are enculturated with these ideas. And I think that is part of like the financial stress of the holidays, especially as it relates to gift giving, is to just communicate openly and honestly with the people with whom you would be getting gifts. And I'll say I might not be the best source of advice on this because I don't really get gift giving as a concept. I've never really understood it. It makes no sense to me. Like, I get it if I'm just talking from a personal level right now, you know, like they're missing the wink thing. This is one of those winks that I just missed, I guess. I get it if it's like, oh, I think, you know, my son is showing an interest in some kind of thing. And then I think about wanting him to get stuff, or I see something and I think, oh, so-and-so would like this. And so I want to get it for him. But to have it established as on a certain day, you have to get a gift for somebody. And then it puts us into a position of like, I don't know what they might like or not. I didn't see anything, or I'm not aware of anything they might enjoy, but I just got to get them a candle.
Yeah, it's always a candle.
Yeah. Which I like candles, but
yeah, same.
I don't know.
The two lighting behind me.
There's actually a very strong argument from economics. Not that economics is the most together field, but that gift giving is a economic net negative, because we're always giving people things that they don't value, and so it's just a bunch of waste going into stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, ignore that. Communicate with people openly and honestly and authentically. For example, I don't care if you surprise me with a gift. Not that it's not like enjoyable sometimes to receive something that I didn't even know existed or wouldn't have thought of for myself. Like, oh, great. But also there's lots of stuff that I want and won't get for myself because it's a waste or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's frivolous or bougie or wasteful or whatever. I would rather just people ask me and I can tell them. I get that like drains the magic out of it somehow for people though.
Yeah, but I feel like the focus shouldn't be on the gift. Sure. It becomes a transaction rather than an expression of love or care. What we've done in our house, my immediate family, we've decided we're doing Secret Santa. So or Kris Kringle, I think, where everybody picks one name out of a hat and just buys a gift for that person, and it takes a lot of the pressure out, and everybody gets a gift, and we have fun.
Much and less stressful because you only have to think about one person, and much cheaper because you're only buying for one person.
And you get to spend more time together instead of spending 3 or 4 days in the run up to Christmas running around the shops, tearing your hair out. So you get to actually sit and relax and enjoy one another's company.
I think there's something to, and I don't know how much of this is like America-centric cultural experience, but when you're like, there's an encouragement or an expectation for children to get lots of individual presents, like separate presents.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't get a 4-year-old like just one big gift, or at least that's not what the expectation is, generally speaking. But as an adult, like I would much rather have one big thing than like 6 little things, you know?
Yeah.
Because that's so formative, those early Christmas experiences. And again, we're using Christmas because that's Marie's experience and my experience, but you know, not everybody's experience. But those early experiences are so formative and so impactful that like it's hard to go back and check that again and be like, do I still really care about having like that's shouldn't say this out loud, but I'm gonna anyway. That stupid like chocolate orange thing that's in your stocking every year that I don't like, and I get every year anyway, just for tradition's sake. I just as a personal thing, I have a respect for tradition and what it is, the like knowledge being passed from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
You know, like this is how things have worked for us. It's a way to remember things and I guess back to gratitude and show honor or respect to the people who've come before and et cetera, et cetera. But you know me, I'm all about like what's useful, and some traditions are not very useful traditions.
Yeah.
So how do we reimagine those things?
Yeah.
Anyway, I also would say not just in terms of like what people want in terms of gifts, but to encourage people to communicate openly and honestly about your financial situation. This is again one of those things. Actually, I'm curious. I think this is like a Western thing, but maybe it's American specifically. The taboo on talking about how much money people make.
Yeah, we don't talk about money. No, it's vulgar to talk about money or whatever. Yeah,
that is a terrible, terrible policy, especially in the workplace. If you can't talk with your colleagues about how much money you make and how much money they make, it decreases your power as an employee. So these don't talk about how much money you make things. They come from the people who pay the paychecks, not the people who make the money in the paychecks.
Yeah.
Talk to people. And yes, there's shame maybe involved in that, or embarrassment or guilt if you have a lot more than somebody or whatever. And that's stuff that needs to be honored and worked through, and don't push yourself to do things that you're not ready to do or that are going to cost you more to do than it's worth or whatever. But I would say push yourself a little bit, you know, push your comfort zone a little bit, an amount that you can tolerate, because we all do that anyway, right? Like, you know, you're making guesses, but you have a rough idea, or at least you have some guesses about how much money everybody has in your family, how much income everybody makes. And even though we don't talk about it out loud because it's taboo, that does come into like, you know, well, I got them this thing and I only make such and such money, but they make that way more money than me, and they got me something even less. And it's all this weird comparative. Just as a general rule, if it's in your head, it's worth saying out loud. And if you can't say it out loud to somebody, that's fine. It just means that you're not safe with that person.
Yeah.
And if you're not safe with that person, then just either work on changing that if it bothers you, or acknowledge it and say, yeah, they're not a safe person for me to be open and honest with, but do the best you can.
Yeah. I think a lot of the holidays is about doing the best you can.
I mean, that's just life. You do the best you can.
Yeah. So that's kind of the emotional side of things and how to handle it. And yeah, communication, always communication.
Yeah.
The executive functioning side of it for people who are neurodivergent, or anybody really who's struggling.
Yeah. Well, even if you have money, it's still, because that psychological impact, we talk about things like poverty mindset and all this different stuff, but effectively, I've heard it phrased this way, that this is a way that helped me to kind of, as a mnemonic device for understanding these viewpoints, that you can view money as a resource or you can view money as a tool. And viewing it as a resource is kind of necessary. Like until I was 29, 30 maybe, you know, starting from age 17 when I started managing my own money and whatever. If you had asked me on any random day at any random point how much money I had in my bank account, I could have told you to within $1 or $2, because I need to know, like, can I afford this thing and still buy enough food to get me by until the next paycheck? I knew every penny coming in and every penny going out, and when bills were due and which bills you could be late on and which bills you really couldn't, and so on and so forth. And then I started doing better financially, and now I couldn't tell you. I go months at a time without looking at my bank account sometimes, because I've got it set up so that it's functioning, and which is really nice. And I know it's coming from a place of privilege, but we all want to get there, right? To the point where money isn't stressing you out constantly. And I have been there. So that viewing money as a resource is that older way that the first way I mentioned, that it comes in and it goes out. It's a pool that you're expanding and shrinking. And you're incentivized when you're looking at it that way to make decisions that are not necessarily good long-term decisions, because you never know what's coming next, right? Like when I was getting down to zero before the next time I got money put into the bank account every single time, every other week or whatever between paychecks, there's always some unexpected cost that's going to come up. So if I had like foregone eating out for one meal with my friends or whatever to save that $20, something else is going to come up and take that $20. But if I spend that then and later on something comes up, well, I don't have the $20, so it can't be taken.
Yeah.
It's kind of how I grew up culturally. It's like when you have some money, spend it.
And
If you don't, somebody's going to come take it anyway. So it's a very short-term thing. And people are forced into that. This isn't me saying that people who don't have a lot of money or who are stressed about money, it's just because they're bad with money. Not at all. We're put in that position. But effectively think of it like this. When that's the way you're dealing with money, the questions are, first, do I want this thing, or would I benefit from this thing? Do I need this thing? Whatever version, yes or no. If yes, then can I afford this thing? And if yes, then I get it.
Yeah.
Whereas switching to money as a tool, then the question instead becomes, like at this point, if I wanted to buy any video game, I can afford to buy any video. It's not like when I was in my 20s and had to be like, all right, I'm saving up for that $60 video game that's coming out, But I'm also not going to just buy a billion video games because I can't play them all. So now the question is not just would I benefit or enjoy, or, do I need this thing? Yes or no. Can I afford it is not really an important question for most like day-to-day purchases. So instead the question is it worth it?
This is cost versus value.
Yeah, it really is. And it is. We're talking about it in finances right now, but it's the same thing. When you are in burnout or when you are in crisis and need to push, then the question, yes, is just, can I afford it? Of course, I want to do X thing. Can I afford to do it? Yes or no? And if yes, I do it. And if no, and it's a short-term view, right? Like, yeah, I have the energy to work out right now. Let's do it. I'm not thinking about the fact that 6:00 tonight, my friends are going to call and want to get together, and I'm not going to have the energy to do it at that point.
Yeah.
Because you just do it when you can do it. You don't have the luxury of planning that far in advance. But then when you start to get a bit of a handle and be able to like project into the future a little bit, and yes, to do that requires that you have some spare resources, because it takes time and energy to make a plan. You have to have some time and energy available to make that plan. So we all need help to some extent. Anyway, separate thing, getting off track again. Yeah, and then the question is it worth it?
Yeah.
And that's not like an easily answerable question. Is this video game worth $60? Is not always easy for me to monetize. Sometimes, yeah, I get 40 hours of enjoyment out of it. Cool. Sometimes, I played it for 2 hours and never really got back to it. Bit of a waste. But you do your best to make your guesses instead of just, can I afford it? Yes or no?
Yeah.
So that's what I would encourage in terms of like the way you're approaching it. That's not the practical thing to do, and we can talk more about that. But to try, to the extent that you're able to approach it from, is it worth that money? One way to look at that is opportunity cost. What else could I do with that money instead? If I didn't spend it on this, what else could I do with it instead? Because money itself, all the crypto bros, unfortunately, are correct about this. Money itself has no inherent value. It's an artifact that we use, and it is a very, very valuable artifact to exchange energy one with another.
Yeah. Money itself is neutral.
Right. It doesn't mean anything except for we imbue it with stuff, but that's true of literally every language. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
The function that it serves is to create a standardized rate of exchange for inherently non-standardizable things. Meaning, if on the barter system, like, okay, you give me a bundle of wood and I'll give you a chicken, we just haggle it out and mutually agree what seems to be fair to each of us.
Mm-hmm.
Where instead, if I can sell my chicken for some amount of money and buy some firewood for some amount of money, then if it doesn't exactly equal out, there's more nuance and flexibility. Although from what I understand, I could be wrong about this, but from what I understand, currency was initially invented for tax purposes, because the tax collectors would go around in, like, I think it was ancient Phoenicia or whatever, and it was very difficult logistically to like take one out of every 10 livestock back to the, so instead you invented these little tokens that represented that even though you still have the livestock here, we technically own it. I guess that's kind of like NFTs. Anyway. So that's one way of doing it. You can look at it in terms of your time and energy. How much of your time and energy did it take you to acquire X amount? This thing costs X dollars or pounds. You guys still use pounds, right? Oh, yeah. You're not even in the U anymore. I forgot.
Yeah.
Sorry, sore subject, I'm sure. Yeah. What did it take from me, time and energy wise? And vice versa, especially ADHDers, neurodivergent people. When paying other people to take tasks off your plate, like a housekeeper, for example, or a dog walker or whatever, like paying people for services, you can do the same thing in reverse. How much time and energy does this free up for me? Is it worth X dollars, X pounds in order to free up Y hours and Z energy? Instead of, is it okay for, no, I can clean my house myself, so I shouldn't. That's not the question. Of course, you theoretically, almost anybody can clean given enough time and energy and whatever. The question is how much?
Yeah. How much of your time do you have to spend on it, and how much of it do you want to give away to do that versus doing something else? That might be more fun.
And cooking, by the way, definitely around the holidays especially tends to be an element of that. If you enjoy cooking, great, and many people do. But if you're doing it out of a sense of obligation, or we have to cook a home cooked meal instead of just getting it catered or whatever, might be one of those things you want to look at and say, okay, time and energy against money, which one is more valuable to me in this case? Because you're giving up one or the other. You just get to choose.
Yeah. Or make it easier on yourself by, cooking some of it the night before. It doesn't all have to be, all done on the day. I think find ways to make it easier for yourself.
And again, open and honest and authentic communication, because a lot of the time there are, you got to make that same traditional dish, even though nobody really likes it. Everybody thinks somebody else is the one that really cares. Oh, we have to make such and such because Aunt Lisa is really going to be looking. Nobody else cares, and then you find out Aunt Lisa doesn't really care either.
Mm-hmm.
My mother-in-law, wonderful person, love her to death, bless her heart. Bless her heart. That was a bad thing to say. That's Southern.
That's Southern, yeah.
In the Southern U.S. for years. No, my mother-in-law is a genuinely wonderful person, and somehow has gotten the impression that there are certain dishes that I just love that I don't, and I don't know how she got that. They're fine. I like the little sausages on sticks just fine. But every time we go over, she's saying, "Who did I make these for?" I'm like, "Oh, thank you." Like, I don't know. There's a lot of that, just playing out traditions, and you want to be able to communicate best you can. I'm never going to tell my mother-in-law that I don't love those little sausages. So
she's not watching.
No, not one for streaming. My mother,
okay.
Wonderful. And just as an example, I keep saying over and over, like, to the extent that you can, or to the extent that it's worth it. Like, obviously, I'm not telling every single person. I would never get a gift from someone and be like, actually, I don't value this. This is your money. There's other elements of it that matter beyond just efficiency and utility and the relationship and how people feel. But also, that's not what you want, right? Like, I don't want someone to fake enjoying a gift from me. I'd rather either get them something they like or just not waste my time.
Yeah.
I keep coming back to the overwhelm and the emotional and all that kind of stuff. Get me onto the practical stuff.
Practical stuff about finances or other practical
I don't think I did. Did we talk much about like what to do in terms of?
We didn't really. We kind of touched on it about planning expenses, or.
I mean, on a very practical level, there are approximately 7 billion different apps that will help you with budgeting, and I would say try a bunch of them. I'm not going to recommend a specific one.
Yeah.
because different ones work for different people. Some of them you can even link directly to your bank account if you're comfortable with that, and they can track things automatically without you having to enter things. So yeah, you want some external outside of your head. And of course, we all immediately, not all, but people tend to immediately go to thinking about writing it down, making a list, planning it out, all that kind of way, which is a great way to do it. But there are a lot of other ways to do it too, including all these different apps. But it has to be external. Don't try to track it in your head. It is, even if you do it correctly and accurately and keep track of things, which people do. Because that's when I tell people to write stuff down, they're like, "Why? I remember it." Yeah, that happens. Although, even those of us who are really good at remembering stuff still occasionally lose track of a thing or two. But even if it goes well, what does it cost you? Yes, it takes time and energy to write stuff down, but it takes working memory space and energy to remember stuff. So you're trading your time for headspace. And I would rather have open headspace and take the time to write some stuff.
Yeah. And again, you mentioned, whether or not it's worth spending money and kind of weighing that up. I think, some of these apps are really worth the few pounds or dollars per month you'll spend on them if they're going to save you hours and hours of headaches, past due bills turning up on your doorstep.
Yeah.
Let's
save ourselves some time. I'm just going to say dollars from now on, and you just say pounds from now on. We don't have to keep acknowledging that other currencies exist.
Fair enough.
I set that precedent. So, it's always about exchange. And when people get in trouble with this stuff, usually it's because they're failing to consider the other option also has a cost.
Yeah.
People will just focus on, well, I have to do this to save money, and not realize, well, then what are you spending instead of the money? And yes, sometimes that's important, but sometimes
I think we tend to undervalue our time.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Neurodivergent people especially tend to undervalue their own time and energy and attention and awareness. That's why I use all this like economic language with the accomplishment equation and cost and value and all that stuff, because I don't want to take us too off board. We have only done one question, but the one thing you can say about neurodivergent, any person who identifies as neurodivergent, you can universally say that they identify as being significantly different from the norm in some way that impacts them meaningfully, right?
Yeah.
Everything else might be different, but that one thing has to be true, that they think that they're different in some particular way, in a significant way. And what that tends to mean then is anytime we struggle or suffer, that we have a tendency to think, well, other people wouldn't struggle or suffer with this. I'm only struggling or suffering because I'm different. And therefore, I should just do it anyway, or I should learn how to do this better or be different at it. So it ends up in, we tend to devalue our own suffering. Like, this is super hard, but of course it's hard for me because I am different and that's why it's hard, which that's true. Sometimes at least, or at least it's always an element of it. But it does tend to kind of sometimes block us from considering what other elements of a thing might be causing the problem. Like maybe some things are just inherently painful, even for other people. And because we're assuming that other people don't have a hard time with it, we treat it as something we should be able to do, even though nobody ever does.
Yeah.
Anyway, just keep that in mind. Your time and energy matter. Even if at the end of the day, all you care about is money, well, you get money with your time and energy and attention and awareness. So it's just an extra step. Spending this money saves me this much time and energy and blah, 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 which I can then use to generate this much money. Is it a net gain or a net loss? I wouldn't do it that way, but
I know it feels like it shouldn't make sense to weigh up emotional, like big heavy emotional concepts like that, but it actually takes a lot of the weight out of it, I think, to talk about it like cost in terms of cost and value.
Another thing that this I can't say is universally true. Another thing tends to be true of people who identify as neurodivergent is that we're pretty cognitively oriented, meaning we notice and examine our own like conscious experience. To even notice that something seems difficult for me means I'm paying attention to my experience of it. To notice that that seems like it might be more difficult than it is for other people means that I have to be paying attention to some social indicators of how other people experience the thing. I'm thinking about stuff. And so an actual true like story for me, literally just last night, over the past several weeks, I've been dealing with like really strong anxiety, and it's been freaking me out because I don't know what's happening. Because I'll be happy and fine and just everything's and then all of a sudden I'm feeling like panicky. I just 3 weeks I've been like getting into my head and almost getting obsessive about like what's wrong, like worried about why am I getting anxious for no reason. And now at this point I'm just anxious about the fact that I'm noticing that I'm getting anxious for no reason. And just
Yeah.
last night I finally made a connection and connected a few things. I was like, oh, wait a second, this is heartburn that I've never apparently, I mean, I'm sure I've experienced heartburn many times in my life, but that's just not how I process interoceptive signals like that, right? Like when I feel that pit in my stomach, that sensation that I feel, I'm like, okay, this is either anxiety or excitement. Because when I get really excited or really anxious, I feel that.
Yeah.
But in this case, it didn't match with any cognitive element. But I just forget that sometimes there's things that don't have a cognitive element that happen in your body. So it's not just about like getting out of your head and blah, 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 and whatever. It's also you're missing, or at least potentially missing, like effective strategies to make things change for yourself. That
Yeah.
maybe instead of being like, okay, I got to do more, like I got to meditate and breathe and identify all these things that are irritating me or causing me, and like, oh, maybe I need to stop eating acidy foods after 7 o'clock at night. Like,
Yeah,
not
I've had that experience, and yeah, it feels like you're about to have an anxiety attack or something, and it's just. But if you've never had it before, you don't know.
right. Especially if you have had, like, I've had some panic attacks in my life, not a lot, but some. So when all of a sudden out of the blue, it's like, oh, what's going on? It starts you worrying about stuff.
Yeah.
So getting us out of our heads. Not everybody needs to get out of their heads all the time, but neurodivergent people, especially, just you mentioned, it takes the weight off of it. It feels dismissive sometimes. It feels invalidating to myself sometimes to be like, this is probably just because I'm hungry or whatever. But
Yeah.
otherwise, if I treat every single thought and experience in my head as though it's very important and very serious, I should not be taking that seriously. And I should definitely not be taking every stray thought in my head that seriously. Our brain just, I'm getting way off when we should do questions, but I was going to get into ego dystonic intrusive thoughts, which are definitely just, again, the brain has random thoughts pop in. What if I swerved off the road while I'm driving, right?
Mm.
Because it's doing what it does. It's running scenarios and saying, would that be a good idea? No, that wouldn't be a good idea. Or what if that happened? What would I do? Oh, I don't know. I'd probably die or whatever. But sometimes the thought happens or you feel a feeling and you get a sense of like, uh-oh, what does that mean? Why did I just think about swerving off the road? And now because you're nervous about what it might mean, now you're going to think it again more. And every time, the more you abhor the thought and what it might mean about you, the more you keep thinking it and the more you panic every time you do.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, get me back on questions. I'm going on.
All right. Well, one of the other questions we had, I can pull it up, was about managing anxiety during the holidays if you struggle with social anxiety. And I think we've kind of touched on it because you're talking about interoception and getting out of your head. But with individuals, the question is with individuals struggling with social anxiety, what are ways to cope through the holidays when you're attending large family gatherings?
So, number one, I would say take small steps, titrate your socialization. Titrate's a
Like that.
medical term for when you start on a new medication, you titrate the dose, meaning we try a small dose and then we do a little more and a little more and a little more until side effects get too bad and then we step it back, or until there doesn't seem to be any increased benefit and we stop. So titrate your socialization. Start with a little bit. As long as that goes well, do a little more and a little more and a little more and a little more. And always, always, always have an escape plan. Make sure that you know that your escape plan does not require any socialization in order to enact it. Meaning your escape plan can't be, oh, I'll just excuse myself and tell everyone, good night and I'll see them tomorrow. Because you might get into a situation in which you're depleted socially and can't navigate difficult social situations, and also have the sense that people wouldn't want you to leave. So now you're stuck, because how do you have a difficult conversation, or at least one that you think might be difficult, when you're depleted? So you got to set these things up ahead of time. Depending on who you are, like, when I work with kids who are going with their families or whatever, then I'll always have them work with their parents. Not everybody has that option with parents. I don't work with those kinds of families typically. Not that I wouldn't, but I'm very clear with parents about the kind of work I do. So the kind of parents that aren't supportive and accessible to support their children don't tend to bring their kids to work with us. You work with the people with whom you are closest so that you can have some kind of code phrase or signal or sign that you need to be taken out. And also with them to be able to notice and recognize things in you, so that even if you don't know it, or even if you're noticing it but don't have it in you to tell even them that you're safe with, that they can say, you need to step away, or whatever it is that needs to be done. Bringing things with you when you're trapped at a physical location, we're going to grandma's house or whatever, and I can't just physically leave because, I'm riding with other people or whatever. Bring things with you, activities with you.
Yeah, I mean, we let kids do this all the time. We let them bring their games consoles or their books or their toys or whatever. We should be giving ourselves the same, extending ourselves the same grace, I think.
Yeah. I always find it funny that there's this joke, at least again here in the States, about guys will just disappear to the bathroom for 45 minutes to look at their phone or whatever. And it's because in many cases, well, at least sometimes I think it is because in many cases, that's their only valid reason to leave and be by themselves for a little while. Mm-hmm. That they don't know how to say, I just need to go be by myself for 45 minutes. But it is always valid to say, oh, I need to use the bathroom. And that's one of those taboo things. Nobody can be like, why are you in there so long? So, when I was young and I was obsessed with reading, and I never wanted to go to bed. When it was time to go to bed, I always want to read. So I would go to the bathroom 10, 15 minutes before bedtime because my parents wouldn't rush me out of there. And I would just stay in there and read for 3 hours. Mm-hmm. And so even still to this day, there's that. But little, life hack, I have to go to the bathroom is not usually something that people will challenge or get suspicious about. Mm-hmm. If you're really desperate and you need to get out of a social interaction, I need to go to the bathroom, will usually work.
Yeah.
Take it. Okay.
I like to go for walks.
Yeah.
Or help out in the kitchen.
Yep. I'll do the dishes. Yeah. You guys all go relax. Let me wash dishes. Again, there's a lot of toxic masculinity stuff involved in this, and misogyny and whatever, all this stuff all rolled into it, all this tradition and blah, blah, blah. But I think that's part of the reason there's so much football on Thanksgiving in the United States is, I'm going to watch the game. It just gives me an excuse to sit down. I'm technically socializing because we're watching it together, but we're not looking at each other and having deep we're all looking at a game and getting invested in that. There's a reason that getting off into other things again. Refocus me because we only got 8 minutes left and I've got questions.
Okay. Let's see, what else do we have? So there's a question around consent and boundaries around family members during the holidays. For example, if a relative forces a child to hug somebody despite the child not wanting to, or how to navigate difficult or toxic conversations. So a family member saying, you're eating a lot or you're not eating enough. Those kind of intrusive comments that tend to slip out. They're often well-intentioned, but they can come across as
and that's one thing you can do. So I'll start with what I would prefer people be able to do, but things are not always options, right? And so what I would prefer is that we, again, just be able to communicate openly and honestly. So like you talk to your children about the fact that their body is their body and nobody's allowed to touch it, even grandma or auntie or anybody else without their consent. And you teach them how to be able to communicate those boundaries and say, no, thank you, or whatever. But especially when they're kids, depending on who your family is, you're going to also need to communicate with the family and explain it to them because they may not understand. Like, unfortunately, that is sometimes like that's almost like a social ritual is, oh, come here, I'm going to pinch your little cheek. We know you won't like it, but I've got to do it. And it's this antagonistic way of like joking and expressing love that is just very traditional in certain cultures and families. So we want to communicate with people about sometimes they feel, sometimes they don't. I really I have found, at least more recently, people are more aware of sensitivities. And so if you frame it in that way, instead of just like, no, thank you, I don't want a hug, if you frame it as, oh, they got some real sensitivities around touch. And so sometimes they're in a space where they can have a hug, but sometimes they're not. And you got to check with them. Otherwise, it could really like, cost them or help, send them over the edge or whatever. That language seems to be kind of like in the same way that if you're really sad and just can't be doing anything or moving and someone's like, hey, how are you feeling? You can't just say, I'm really sad. I mean, of course you can, but culturally we're talking about, but it is acceptable to say, oh, I'm really tired, leave me alone, or I'm sick, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. If we make it about a sensitivity, then people seem to respect that more.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how it would go down in the culture I was raised, and I think maybe with younger generations that would be respected, but with the older generations it would be seen as being a child being a little bit precocious or a little bit too big for their boots because they're not respecting the wishes of their elders.
Does precocious have a negative connotation for you?
Yeah.
That's very funny.
Yeah. So, hey, language. Okay.
Well, actually, I'm really curious now whether that has a negative connotation generally, and I've just missed it. Because precocious literally means like behaving as though they are older than they are.
Yeah.
So I've heard it mostly used in reference to like a child is very bright. They're reading things ahead of their grade level or whatever. They're precocious. But my experiences are in a narrow window. I wonder if that's.
I think sometimes it's used in a way to say that the child is a little bit too big for their boots. Thinks they're smarter than they are. That kind of thing. Yeah.
That's funny.
It comes back to respecting one's elders. So I wonder if there's another way to frame that thing about sensitivities in a way that we say older generations would understand. Maybe, yeah. Child.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. And I think you're right. As a trend, the older somebody is, the less likely they are to be understanding of that. Also, as a trend, men are less likely to be understanding of that, but also are less likely to be wanting to initiate hugs with
Yeah.
But of course, none of this applies to any individual case. These are just like statistical trends. But yeah, the older, yeah. Now, another way of approaching this, again, less ideal, but sometimes it's that they're just not going to understand it. And the social cost or whatever cost to you of just outright refusal, even though they don't, then maybe there are times. But see, I would be really, really careful about this because we don't want to get into a situation where for ourselves or especially for our kids, we're enforcing this narrative of like, yeah, well, sometimes you just go along with it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we don't want to also get overly like there are distinctions. There's granularity. Like anti-pinching your cheek is not the same thing as rape. Can they be connected by certain consent and touch? And yes, absolutely. Not the same. And we're not going to devalue how serious some of those things are by making something less serious, not serious at all. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Like there are times where you have a certain job and you wear a uniform, right? Like that's non-consensual, but it's not the same as like someone demanding that you wear a sexy outfit to come to their house, differences. So there might be times where it's worth that and you prep around it and just say like, okay, we're going to give grandma a hug. I know she wears that like perfume that you don't like. Try to talk to her about it and she's not doing it. So just be ready for it. And I'm going to bring this thing that you like the smell of. And so when you give grandma a quick hug, just hold your breath and then you smell this thing right afterwards.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Do your best to mitigate it and prep for it. Context matters. There are differences between like grandma wants to give her grandkid a hug, like doesn't make her an evil, terrible person, right?
But it's okay to say no.
It is absolutely okay to say no. And sometimes you don't really like the sausage appetizers, but you just say that you do anyway.
Yeah.
Distinctions, granularity, different things are different. Another thing that can be done if you can't get the other person to engage with you, kind of what we're talking about. Some people are just not going to engage with these conversations and ways of understanding things, is to try and do some work on your end to understand, again, less than ideal, but a thing that can be helpful sometimes is to try to see what you think they might be trying to express.
Yeah.
Meaning like if somebody says something like, oh, have some more, you barely had anything, or whatever, that can be triggering to you. Or somebody says something like, oh, you look so tired, that can be very like, sometimes that's just people speaking inartfully, or intention and interpretation are two different things. Like you look tired, most of the time people won't take offense if you say you seem tired.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say you look tired, now it's about my appearance and you're saying I don't look like I've put myself together and I got it. So to the extent that you can, if it's useful to you, you can try and play that game. That I like to play that game. Someone cuts you off in traffic, it pisses you off, and then I just tell stories about what's going on with them until I hit on one that makes me be like, oh, okay, not a problem.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Again, careful, because I want to do it in cases where I don't really need to interact with this person very much, so it's not a big deal. And whatever my experience is in response to whatever they did is unenjoyable. Like I'm feeling insulted or offended, or I'm feeling angry, things that I don't like to feel. Then I can play this game in my head until I can say, oh, you know what? My grandma, who in all other ways is lovely and nice to me, probably didn't mean to say I look like shit.
Yeah.
She probably is concerned about me and was trying to express that. Very difficult game to play. You can enlist your friends or family, whoever's there with you, to play this game with you. Say, okay, so and so said such and such to me. What do you think that means? And then you got to come with, well, it could mean. Just know that you're playing a game. It could mean that they were trying to say you look like shit. Like
it's one option, but there are others.
Yeah. That's like my whole life. I just all the time, like, what could they have meant? It seems very strange to me that this person would have said such a terrible thing. So what might they have meant that somehow got translated into that thing that sounds terrible?
Mm-hmm. My mother always says if she's encountered somebody who's being difficult or rude or whatever during the day, I don't know what happened to that person before they left the house this morning. It could have been something really bad. So
yeah,
I just hope they're just having a bad day, right? And let it go. Yeah.
Walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, or what's that one quote? Something about you don't know what battles they're fighting, or something like that.
Oh yeah. Oh, be kind to everyone you meet, because everyone's fighting a hard battle, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we do have a tendency to get a little egocentric in this stuff, where we're saying, how dare grandma, who wants to hug the kid even though the kid doesn't want to hug that old bat, like how dare she not keep up on modern sensibilities and blah blah blah. Yeah. But if you flip it around and position yourself as, oh, grandma's the one I'm trying to protect, then I'd be like, how dare that? I almost swore.
Snotty little kid.
How dare my cousin come at my grandma like she's a terrible person because she wanted to hug her grandkid, right? Like, we're all people, we're all doing the best that we can. Look, I'll say this, we gotta get wrapping up, but I'll say I don't really believe in the idea of like good people and bad people, or at least I don't think it's a useful idea. I think it's a useful way for you and I to talk about somebody else as a way to like compare our values or perception of action and etc. I don't think it's a thing that I can actually label someone. Like, sometimes people will say things like bad people are always only people you don't know, or a neurodivergent version of this, like normal people are all the people you don't know.
Yeah,
And
normal. That's normal.
there's a convenient explanation there in neurodivergent kind of communities where it's like, oh, we find each other, you know. Yes, everybody I know also happens to be neurodivergent, but that's just because we found each other. It's those other people we don't. If you look closely enough at somebody, they're not bad and they're not normal.
Yeah.
It's just at a distance. Anyway, so I think it's more useful to look at impact. Not why is someone doing what they're doing, but what is it that they're doing and what is the impact that it has? And I got to deal with them based on that. If you beat somebody up, I don't care if you're a good person or a bad person, or if that makes you a good person or a bad person, but I'm going to interact with you as though you are somebody who beat somebody up. And that means I'm going to shape what I do. Sometimes I'm going to work, depending on what you're doing, I'm going to work the hardest that I can work, do everything I can to stop you from doing what you're doing or to undo everything. I am going to oppose people and fight against people. That doesn't require that I think of them as a bad person.
No.
And I think that's actually problematic to make it about some quality of a person as opposed to the thing that is happening, because then we end up in situations where we're in a fight because some of us are saying grandma's terrible for wanting to hug the kid, and some of us are saying the kid is terrible for not allowing grandma to hug them, when neither of them are terrible. They're just people. Some are terrible, I get, you know, like knowledge. It doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be that if you think differently or if you do something that I don't want you to do, that means you're evil. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can be somebody who's wonderful and lovely, and you can love me very much and still do something that I really need you not to do. And I'm going to try to talk to you about not doing it. And if it keeps happening, I need to start planning on it happening, including that might mean removing myself from your life or whatever. But it doesn't mean that you don't love me.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember too that tensions and emotions are heightened around big holiday events and family events like this. And a few days afterwards, you know, it all melts away. If we keep that in mind, some of these things might pass by a little more peacefully without you know, hanging on to grudges or. And I did that last Christmas. What if she does it again this Christmas? You know, let it go.
Yeah.
Everybody's having a rough time sometimes.
Yeah. Does it serve you is the only question. Does it serve me to be angry at the person that cut me off in traffic? No. That has no utility to me. So I want to do what I can do to get rid of it. Does it serve me to be angry at the person, you know, my colleague who keeps bullying me? Like, yeah, in that case, maybe it does. Maybe I am then able to think of or interact with that person differently. So it still just comes back to utility. And I'll throw out there too, the older someone is, yes, there are physical like elements to cognition and blah, blah, blah. But also life changes, you know, like holidays and feasts and festivals and whatever. Back in the day, there were no weekends, there were no breaks. You just worked, except for these few feasts or festivals or holidays or celebrations or whatever, where everybody got to relax and enjoy the fruits of the spoil. And yeah, it's, you know, that was in the 1950s. We're going to have to go farther back than that. But there's something to like, I hate when people are anti-internet or anti-screen time or whatever. It has its challenges and causes problems, but also great benefit, and it's complicated. But it is true that I am not as used to boredom as my grandma is. That to me, Thanksgiving dinner might just be a distraction because I have 8 100 other things that I would find more enjoyable to do. But over the course of her life, looking forward to Thanksgiving dinner was like the one enjoyable thing she had to look forward to for a month. And so, yes, it does it can be a bigger deal to her for me to be there than it can be for me to stay home and do something I want to do instead.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I have to do it, but just I think it's
No.
worth taking that into consideration.
Yeah, I missed Christmas last year because I got sick and we weren't sure if it was COVID and I had to wait around and do a test before I could travel. So I didn't get home for Christmas. I got home for New Year's. And I coped. I was fine. I just sat here and had a mini Christmas dinner on my own. But I know that my mum and dad were disappointed that I didn't make it because these holidays hold huge meaning for them, and especially when your kids grow up and move away and you don't see the grandkids as often as you'd like or the kids as often as you'd like. These holidays do hold huge meaning. So I guess
and they do tend
forgive
to
grandma if she wants to give you a hug.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't mean you have to do whatever somebody wants. It's
No,
just, these are all things to take into consideration.
Yeah.
And yes, the older somebody is, the more likely it is that the traditions are very important to them.
Mhm.
In the same way that once grandma's gone, making her recipe every year at Thanksgiving might become very important for you as a way to remember her. Well, how many people has she lost that enacting these traditions are her way of staying connected to them? Just this is why always the real answer comes back to communicate openly, honestly, authentically, to the extent that you're able. Because hopefully you're not spending the holidays with people that you just genuinely don't like. They don't like you. I know that happens.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's like there are elements of them that I like. And again, let me just give everyone permission, special dispensation right now. It is okay to love and enjoy the company of somebody who has positions or does things that are problematic or that you disagree with. It is okay to have fun with your uncle, even if he is a racist jerk. You don't have to. And I know other people would say differently. I am taking a position here. I'm just saying, I don't know that it really does much for the cause for you to have a big emotional argument with your uncle. It's not going to change his way. I'm not saying if he says something, don't make a comment about it. I make people feel very uncomfortable quite frequently as a mixed race person, a person of color who is pretty close to white passing and married to a white woman, and people will often forget and say things around me that I can make them feel absolutely terrible for with just an easy comment. Doesn't need to be a huge fight. So I'm not saying socially tolerate the actual enactment of that stuff. If someone's being reasonable or nice, you don't have to say, this thing you posted on Facebook 2 months ago. You can. There's nothing wrong with that either. Just saying, don't let yourself Actually, someone put it this way: in a big choir, when you have to hold a note for an incredibly long period of time, what happens is some members of the choir will drop out and take a breath while the rest keep going, and then they'll come back in, and then some of those others who kept going can drop out and take a breath and come back in. It's staggered breathing. We all take our little breaks and breaths. It's okay for these to be a little break and a breath for you. It's okay. It enables you to get back to your advocacy or back to whatever it is that you're working on. If every once in a while you can put the burden down.
Yeah.
It's okay. Everything you're doing is okay. The more I agree with you, the more I want you to enjoy your holiday and not feel like you're going into battle.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you are, but I don't, to the extent that you can avoid it, let's avoid it.
Yeah. If you're mad at Uncle Bill, that's no reason to ruin dinner for Grandma, I guess. Sure. Pick your battle, maybe.
Okay, I have cut uncles out of my life in a very real, legitimate, there are family members that I don't interact with. I'm not saying don't do it or never do it, or just, you don't have to unless it serves you.
Yeah.
Me cutting them out of my life didn't decrease the power that they hold to whatever extent they hold power. And it didn't change their opinions. It just means that they think I'm a jerk now too.
Yeah.
But I can't be around it.
Um,
Aha, someone's
it is
yelling at me to wrap
time
up.
for you to wrap up.
Oh,
Thanks,
13
thanks,
minutes.
Fast Insider, for all the comments. Thank you for all. We didn't get to all of them, but thank you, and thank you for all the cat emojis. I didn't even know so many cat emojis existed. And thanks for putting up with Billy on the call today. Good to be with you, and hopefully see you same time next week.
Yes, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.